All right, so we meet again today. This is a cell biology class, so I will be teaching this class. I think this is the last session for cell biology, if I'm not mistaken. The weeks after today, I don't think there are any more sessions or materials from lecturers, but I think you're free to prepare your assignment. Yeah. Before we start, I have a message from the other lecturers, especially Bu Chatur, I think, that for you. So please remember to contact your supervisors for this assignment, the assignment for cell biology, and discuss with them the topics of your presentation. So just to remind you, the assignment for cell biology is to create a presentation with a particular topic, and I'm sure you've already seen the announcement of the different groups and different topics. Yeah? So please don't forget to contact the lecturers to discuss your topic for the presentation. And don't forget to prepare the presentation. If I'm not mistaken, I think the deadline is next week. Yeah. All right. Let me start sharing the screen. Okay. All right. Hopefully you can see the slide now. So today we'll be discussing this topic. We'll look at different examples of different types of cells, especially cells in the human body, and also how we look at some examples of diseases or common diseases that are caused by a malfunction in a particular type of cell. Yeah. All right. So okay. So I'm sure this part has been discussed with you in the previous sessions. Yeah. We know that cells inside our body are organized in such a way that they group similar cells group with other similar cells, and they form a particular function. Right? So the organization of cells inside a body are cells. The similar cells, they form what are called tissues. So tissues are a group of cells with a similar structure that form tissues and then perform a particular function, right? And then a group of tissues also work together to form an organ. And then groups of organs, different organs work together to perform very large functions, a large overall function that we call organ systems. And we, as organisms, humans and animals and plants, organisms are made up of different organ systems. Yeah. So when we talk about the types of cells, different types of cells, it's useful to look at a big picture. So we're not only looking at the different types of cells, but also the different types of tissues that are available in the body. Yeah. Oh yeah, so here we're focusing on the human body. We're not focusing on plants or animals. Animals have very similar structure overall to humans. Yeah, so we won't focus on animals. We just focus on humans. But most of the things that we discuss about humans also applies to animals. So here you can see that these are examples of different types of tissue. So we have epithelial tissue, we have connective tissue, we have muscle tissue, and we have nervous tissue. And as you can see, these different types of tissue, they perform different functions, but they all perform functions that overall help the functioning of a particular organ, for example. So here, for example, you can see that these different types of tissues, we have 4 different types of tissues. They perform different functions, but they all support the functioning of the stomach. So in the stomach, we see epithelial tissue, we find also connective tissue, we also find muscle tissue, and also nerve tissue. Now, here are examples of the types of cells in the human body, which we will look at. There are, of course, many more types of cells than this. Even some of these types of cells, such as blood cells, they have different subtypes. And immune cells, there are so many different types of immune cells, which are technically part of the blood or blood cells. Muscle cells, we have skeletal muscle cells, we have smooth muscle cells, we have cardiac muscle cells. Bone cells, there are many different types of bone cells. We have osteoblasts, osteoclasts, and so on. Yeah, so these are just large groups of types of cells that are available in the human body. And obviously, we won't be able to discuss every single one of them, all different types of cells in this just one session. Yeah. Later, I think next semester, you will have a course titled Human Anatomy and Physiology. In that course, you will go into deeper detail, a deep dive into the different organ systems and the anatomy of the different organ systems, the structures of the organs and so on, and also their function. Yeah. So you will learn a lot more about the human body and the organs and organ systems that make up the human body in that lecture. But here, I just want to give you a quick overview of the types of cells, the types of tissues that are found inside the human body. So we have epithelial cells, muscle cells, neuron cells, blood cells, bone cells, and adipose cells, or also known as fat cells. All right, let's look at epithelial cells. So epithelial cells are cells that are found on surfaces usually. Yeah. So they make up the surface of our body on the inside. Yeah. So on the outside of our body, the surface of our body is the skin, right? We have skin on that covers all of the outside of our body, except for the eyeballs, and yeah, except for eyeballs, right? I don't think any other part of our body is not covered by skin, at least on the outside. Yeah. So skin covers the external parts of our body. Now, for the internal parts, so inside our mouth and inside our, so if you think about the mouth and where it leads, it's a big hollow tube, right? A big tube that leads from the mouth all the way to the anus. Yeah. So the whole gastrointestinal tract is just a big long tube. Now, the surface of that tube is made up of cells called epithelial cells, as you can see here. These are examples of epithelial cells. Another example is your lungs. Yeah? So the airways. So the airways go from your nose, yeah? Your nostrils. They go all the way in. They join with your mouth or the tube or the pathway from the mouth, and also go through the trachea, bronchus, bronchi, and all the way to the lungs and alveoli in the lungs, right? Now, these airways are also, the surfaces of these airways are also made up of epithelial cells, right? So this is an example of, these are two examples of epithelial cells. Now, one particular property of epithelial cells is that they have a polarity. What it means is that they have two surfaces that are very different. So here you can see at the bottom, they have what's called the basolateral surface. And then at the top, you have what's called the apical surface. So you think about the epithelial cell that lines your gastrointestinal tract, your digestive tract, for example. Yeah. So the apical surface of the epithelial cells on the surface of that gastrointestinal tract, the apical surface faces the lumen, or faces the tract, right, the outside of the, so it faces the gastrointestinal tract. Whereas the basolateral surface, this anchors that epithelial cell onto other tissues down there. Yeah. So if you look at this epithelial cell, okay, so if say this epithelial cell is in the stomach, so this is the stomach up here at the top, right? And if this cell is in the lungs, for example, then the top at the top, that's the lungs, all the airways, Yeah. So epithelial cells, they have a specialized apical surface. So the apical surface is the one on the outside, right, or at the top, facing the the pathway or the lumen, or be it airways or intestines or stomach or anything else like that. And then we have the basolateral surface. Now, it says here the apical surface is very specialized because the structure of the apical surface depends on where the epithelial cell is. So, for example, if this epithelial cell is in the stomach or in the intestine, let's say intestine, if this epithelial cell is in the intestine, the apical surface will have small, very small hairs like this. These are called microvilli. Microvilli, very small structures that look like hairs on their surface. Now they have a function. If you, okay, you may not know this story yet, but we know that the intestines, our intestines, have one main function, which is to absorb a digested food, right? When we eat, that food is digested in the stomach, and then it's also digested in part in the intestine. But the main function of our small intestine is to absorb all the nutrients of that digested food. Now, because absorption happens in the small intestine, the surface of the small intestine has to be very large. So the cells that line the surface of the small intestine are these epithelial cells, and on the apical surface of these epithelial cells, they have microvilli like this. The function of these microvilli is to increase the surface area. So with these microvilli, the surface area of the epithelial cells on the small intestine is increased by magnitudes times, right? It can be 10, oh, no, not 10, more than that, hundreds, thousands, or even millions of times. So the surface of an epithelial cell in the small intestine will have microvilli. Now, another epithelial cell, but located in a different tissue, for example, or different organ, will have a very different epithelial cell, very different apical surface. Yeah, so for example, this epithelial cell on the right, this is an example of an epithelial cell that is on the surface of our airways. So it can be in the bronchi or in the alveoli or in the trachea, somewhere around the lungs and the airways. Yeah. And as you can see, the surface, the apical surface of an epithelial cell on the airways will have big, long hairs called the cilia. Now, these cilia, they have, again, a very specific purpose. What they do is they move around and they help remove dust and particles that enter the airways. So it helps us have airways that are free from blockages, free from dust and particles and bacteria, so that we can breathe easily, and properly, and are not disturbed by anything in the air. So that's the function of these cilia. Right? So once again, epithelial cells have a very specialized apical surface. And then everything else you see here are common in every cell. Here we have the nucleus, we have the Golgi apparatus, we have the mitochondria, and all other organelles that you've already learned before. Okay. So epithelial tissue have many functions, and they are common in all parts of the body. So all the way from the top to from head to toe, we find epithelial tissue everywhere, epithelial cells. Because they are found everywhere, they have a variety of functions, but these are the main four functions. First, they provide protection. Yeah, they provide protection from abrasion, physical protection. They also provide protection in terms of chemicals and chemicals and other substances that can harm our tissues and organs. They also regulate water. They regulate how much water can release or can be absorbed, or how much water can leave our body. So it prevents us being dehydrated. And other than water, these epithelial cells also prevent or control, at least, what substances can pass through them, right, through those cells. So it controls permeability to different tissues. On the surfaces of the membranes of these epithelial cells, on the apical surface, we have many transport proteins which control substances that can go in and out of the tissues and the cell itself, right? And because epithelial cells are located on the surface, they have a lot of nerve supplies or nerve cells. So there are many nerve cells that are located on epithelial tissue, adjacent to epithelial cells usually. And once again, because epithelial cells and epithelial tissue are on the surface of things, there are many cells on epithelial tissue that are very specialized and usually specialized for secretion. And these types of cells, they are called glandular cells. So these glandular cells, cells that specialize in producing some chemical and then releasing that chemical, they also sometimes form glands. And we'll look at some examples later, right? An example is the pancreas. We know that the pancreas produces many chemicals, but one of the most important chemicals that the pancreas produces is insulin, right? And insulin is produced by cells in the pancreas, and that type of cell is an epithelial cell, a specialized epithelial cell that can produce insulin, and then it also secretes that insulin to the interstitial fluid, which then leads to the blood vessels. Now, this is an example of epithelium tissue that are found in the respiratory tract or the airways. Yeah. So you can see at the bottom, this is the basal lamina. You can see these blue cells are the epithelial cells. Yeah. So this is the basolateral surface. This is the apical surface, and you can see on the apical surface, they have cilia, right? Okay. And here you can see that some of these cells are epithelial cells, the blue ones, but then other cells in this tissue are different. They are called goblet cells. Some of these goblet cells, excuse me. Okay, so some of these cells are goblet cells, and goblet cells are specialized cells that produces and secretes some kind of chemical. In this case, in the respiratory tract or in the airways, these goblet cells, they produce mucus, and the mucus, they line the surface. They line the surface of, they cover the surface of our respiratory tract, and they function in capturing or making sure that dust and particles and bacteria and things like that, they stick to the mucus. Yeah? And as I explained previously, the cilia on the surface of epithelial cells, they move around in one direction, and they remove these mucus that are filled with this bacteria and with dust and particles out of the lungs and into the stomach or somewhere else where they can be removed. Right. So this is the function of epithelial cells, as for example, in the respiratory tract. Now, there are many different types of cells that can differentiate and then become cells that secrete things. Yeah? So we have goblet cells, like we saw previously. Goblet cells, they secrete mucus, but they also, they secrete mucus in their airways, but they are also found in the digestive tract. Yeah? So if you think about our digestive tract, one place throughout the digestive tract or the gastrointestinal tract where we need protection by mucus is the stomach. Yeah? Because in the stomach there are many enzymes and there are many acids, right? Stomach acid. The pH in our stomach is very low, which can damage other tissues, right? So our own body can be damaged by the enzymes and also the acid that are found in the stomach. If our tissue is not, or our body is not protected by mucus. So mucus is very important, not only in the airways, but also in the stomach, because it protects our own cells from damage due to the acidity of the stomach. So goblet cells are also found in the stomach, and they secrete mucus to protect our cells. And then there are also other cells, Paneth cells, enteroendocrine cells. These cells they form the innate immune system. So they secrete enzymes, they secrete glycoproteins, chemicals that can help the body defend itself against bacteria and viruses. But there are also other specialized cells that do not secrete, but instead they absorb. So here are absorptive cells. An example of cells like this are found in the small intestine, as I previously explained. So there are many cells like this where they function in absorbing everything they can. Right? Mostly they absorb food, right? The results of the digestion of food. Yeah, so there are many specialized cells that are found in the epithelial tissue. Yeah. Now, epithelial cells can be classified into 6 different groups, and it depends on whether they are simple or stratified. So here on the top row, we have simple epithelium. So epithelial tissue that are simple are tissue that are made up of just one layer of cells. So here you can see this is one layer, this is also one layer, and this is also, you can see that it's one layer. Other epithelium or epithelial tissue are called stratified tissue. And stratified tissue, as you can see in the diagram, they are made up of more than one layer of cells. Yeah? So here we have many layers of cells, as you can see here and also here. But then each of these different types of, whether they're simple or stratified epithelia, can be divided into 3. So we have squamous, cuboidal, and columnar. Squamous cells, they don't have a particular structure. Yeah. They can be flat like this, they can be irregular shaped like this. Yeah. Cuboidal cells, cuboidal epithelial tissue are made up of epithelial cells that are cuboidal, like a cube. Yeah. So here from the side, you can see them, they are roughly square size or square shaped. And then columnar cells are cells that are like columns, right? They are long rectangles, and yeah, they make up different parts of the epithelium as well. Yeah. So these are the different classifications of epithelial tissue and also epithelium cells. We talked about glands, right? We talked about how in epithelium tissue there are specialized cells that they have a very special function in producing and also secreting and releasing those chemicals that they produce to their surroundings. Now, these types of cells are varied, very varied, as we saw previously, but they can be divided into 2 groups. We have endocrine glands, so glandular cells that release their chemicals into the surrounding interstitial fluid. Also, we also have exocrine glands. So exocrine glands are glands that release their chemicals to the outside world, right, to the surface, epithelial surface. Examples of a endocrine gland, right? Example of an endocrine gland is pancreas. Yeah? The pancreas has many types of cells, but they also have many types of secretory endothelial cells or glandular epithelial cells that produces some chemicals, including insulin, and then secrete those chemicals. They secrete the insulin to their surrounding liquids, right? The surrounding fluid, the interstitial fluid. And then those chemicals, once they've been secreted, they will make their way into the bloodstream, to the blood vessels, and then they will be distributed all over the body. So that's how most cells that produce hormones work. Yeah. So insulin is a hormone that is produced by pancreas, but there are also other organs that produces many other hormones. For example, the pituitary gland in the brain, it produces a lot of hormones. The adrenal gland produces adrenaline, and they all do this through endocrine glands. Now, exocrine glands, an example is the glands that produces sweat, yeah, sweat, and also what's it called, sebum. Sebum is the oily chemicals that are found on our skin. Yeah. Those are exocrine glands. So we'll look at some examples. Now, glands can also be classified depending on their structure. So we have here simple glands, and we have compound glands. As you can see, the simple glands, they have different shapes, but they are simple. The different folds or the different branches, they only form one degree of folds or branch like this, whereas the compound glands, they form more than one degree of folds. Yeah, what I mean by that is that folds or branch, right? What I mean by that is that each branch has their own branch. In this case, there's only 3 branch and that's it. Each branch is just one simple tube. Whereas in the compound gland, each of these 3 branches will have their own branches, and those branches can also have their own branches and so on. And they are also classified according to the shape that they make. Now, there are some examples like simple tubular glands. There are an example is an intestinal gland. So all those different cells that you saw previously that are found in the intestine, they are found in a gland like this. Then we have the pancreas. So the pancreas is also a gland, which is made up of different cells that secrete things. So glandular cells, and they make up a gland that is compound or complex like this. Examples of this are also salivary glands, which secrete your saliva in the mouth. Here we have a simple branch tubular gland that are found in the stomach that releases mucus and things like that. So here are some examples. Okay, so those were examples of epithelial cells and also glandular cells that are found in epithelial tissue. Next, we'll look at connective tissue. Now, connective tissue is, I think, one of the most varied or one of the most diverse tissue, because in the connective tissue we have a wide range of different cell types and different functions that are classified as connective tissue. Oh, sorry. Where were we? Okay. Right. Hold on. Okay. Yeah. So in connective tissue, the most common type of cell that we find is called fibroblast. So fibroblasts are the most common type of cells that are found in connective tissue, and they have a wide variety of functions. But mostly they produce many chemicals. Yeah? So they produce glycoproteins. They produce so many types of chemicals that are needed for other cells to function. Yeah? They produce proteoglycans, prostaglandins, metalloproteinases, glycosaminoglycans, and things like that. There's so many compounds and proteins that they produce. Now, these fibroblasts, they can differentiate into other types of cells. So for example, they can also become osteocytes, which are bone cells. They also differentiate into adipocytes, fat cells, or smooth muscle cells, or cartilage cells, and so on. All these different types of cells, they are they can be part of connective tissue. So connective tissue is one of the most diverse tissue or diverse types of tissue. Now, the functions of connective tissue are to provide structure. So they provide structure to our body. It also provides strength so that we can support our body when we're standing up, things like that. And not only it supports our body as a whole, but it also supports the organs inside our body. Our organs are located at different. So I'm sure you've seen diagrams of the human body before, right? And you roughly know where the locations of our bodies are, right? The heart is in the chest, and it's surrounded by the lungs. The stomach is somewhere around in the middle part of the abdomen. And behind the stomach, you have other organs. On the side of the stomach, we have other organs such as the liver and things like that. The kidneys are behind on the backside of our abdomen and things like that. And all those organs are located in those specific places, and they stay in those specific places, right? Or it doesn't matter what we do. We walk, we run, we sit down, we lie down on our backs, we lie down on our front and things like that. We curl around, but our organs stay relatively in the same shape, in the same place relative to other organs. And that is because all of our organs are connected by what's called the connective tissue. So this connective tissue provides strength, provides structure to our organs, and it helps our organs stay relatively in the same place. It doesn't matter what our body is doing. Another vital function of the connective tissue is to store energy. So if we eat too much, or if we eat more energy than we use, the rest of that energy is not thrown away, right? It's stored in our body for use later when we use too much energy, or we use more energy than we consume. So storing energy is a vital function of our body, and the energy that surplus energy that we consume are stored in connective tissue. And then we also the connective tissue is also important in transporting materials around the body to where it's needed. Now, the connective tissue is not made up of just one type of cell. The connective tissue is made up of a lot of cells, a lot of different types of cells, many different types of cells. They work together and they form the functions of the connective tissue. And they also have a lot of specialized cells. Now, other than cells, though, the connective tissue is also made up of other components that are not cells. Yeah? So one of the most important components of the connective tissue that are not cells is what's called the extracellular protein fibers. So the extracellular matrix is a mixture of things that are not part of cells, but it's still part of the connective tissue. And there's also what's called the ground substance. Basically, ground substance is usually just water and a chemical. I think ground substance, it depends on where the tissue is located in the body, but mostly ground substance is made up of water and organic molecules such as glycosaminoglycans, proteoglycans, glycoproteins, and things like that. It helps. It also functions as a lubricant, so that all of these different components that are mixed together in the connective tissue can freely roam about. So this is a diagram that shows what the connective tissue looks like, or part of the connective tissue looks like. So you can see that it's a big jumbled mess of things. We have different types of cells. Here we have mast cells and macrophages, and these mesenchymal cells, lymphocytes. These cells are cells that are part of the immune system. They are free to roam about in the extracellular matrix like this, in the connective tissue, looking for intruders, right? Looking for pathogens. We also see these different fibers, all these blue like lines and yellow lines. These are different fibers that are made up of proteins. They give the connective tissue that elastic property. So if you look at your body, your flesh, and try to pinch your arm or pinch your body, you can feel that your flesh is flexible, and that is partly because of all of these different fibers, collagen fibers, elastic fibers that are found in the extracellular matrix. This is the extracellular matrix or the connective tissue. You can also see other cells, which you have a blood vessel here that transports blood and also other nutrients. We also have adipose cells. So these adipose cells or adipocytes, these fat cells, they store energy. So this is the function that we talked about previously. So and then all of this is mixed into what's called the ground substance. So this is what part of the connective tissue looks like. It's a big jumbled mess of cells and other components that are not cells. and they make up what's called the extracellular matrix. Okay. Now, the next type of tissue is the bone tissue. Bone cells, so bone tissue or bones, bone tissue is made up of just basically just one type of or organ, which is the bones, right, or the skeletal your skeleton basically. Now, bone tissue is made up of a particular component, called the bone matrix. So as you can see here, which is the bone matrix, which is formed by two different types of cells, or no, it's formed by one type of cell. But there are two different types of cells that are important in bone tissue. We have the osteocytes, and we also have osteoblasts. Osteocytes are bone cells. Osteocytes are basically bone cells, and then there are two main types of bone cells. We have osteoblasts and also osteoclasts. So later, when you study anatomy, you learn that our bones are not fixed. Right? Our bones are in a constant state of being modified. So even though we're already adults, we're not growing anymore. But in children and babies, obviously because they are growing, so their bones are also growing longer and so on. But even as adults, even though we're not growing anymore in terms of size, but our bones are always being changed. So we have two types of cells. First are the osteoclasts. So osteoclasts are cells that break down the bone, basically. So osteoclasts break down the old bone, and then the other type of cell called the osteoblasts, they make new bones. They make new bone matrix. So all of our bones are constantly in the middle of being broken down and then remade, broken down and remade. This makes our bones very strong, and it also makes sure that if there is any damage to the bone, so say if we have a fracture or broken bone, it will eventually be fixed. Right? If you have a broken bone, the doctors they will not do anything to it. All they do is that they put your hand or arm or whatever that's broken in a cast so that it stays straight, it stays still, and then you just wait until the cells of our body, the bone cells in our body, they make the bones, they make new bones basically, right? So our bones are in a constant state of being broken down and then remade. This is a particular structure of a bones. And as you can see, bones are not just bones. They're not solid. They're not solid materials, or they're not made up of solid materials all the way through. You can see that there are many holes, and also there are canals for blood vessels, because bones are made up of cells, and cells need nutrients, they need oxygen. So there are blood vessels inside our bones. Here, so here you can see this is what the process is called, a bone remodeling. And bone remodeling is that process of breaking down old bone and then creating new bones. And this is something that happens constantly. So here you can see these are osteoclasts. They break down old bone, so they make like a tunnel through old bone. And then we have osteoblasts here. These osteoblasts on the green cells on the sides. They lay down new bones. So here you can see these new bones are being laid down through the tunnel where the osteoclasts have destroyed the old bone. And then next we have blood vessels, right? Blood vessels are, so the blood itself is technically part of connective tissue, because it connects every single cell that is available inside our body with every other cell. So that's why it's technically part of connective tissue. Now, blood runs through blood vessels, and there are many types of blood vessels, but the three main types that you may know of are arteries, and then veins, and also capillaries, right? Now here is a picture of an artery, a diagram of an artery on the right, and in the middle and on the left is an electron micrograph of a capillary. So let's look at this diagram on the right first. you can see this is a diagram of a cross section of an artery. So you can see that the lumen of the artery is quite small compared to the diameter of the artery itself. That is because for an artery, the smooth muscle and that surrounds that blood vessel is very thick. And also, outside of that smooth muscle, we have other connective tissue. We have connective tissue that surrounds our blood vessels. Now, the smooth muscle has a function, right? Because it's a muscle, it can contract and it also can relax. So when that muscle contracts, what will happen to the lumen of the artery? It will become smaller. Yeah? So when the smooth muscle contracts, the blood vessel, the artery becomes smaller, the lumen of the artery becomes smaller, and that causes the blood pressure to increase. But then when the smooth muscle decreases or relaxes, then the diameter of the lumen, the hole or the tube inside that blood vessel will increase, which drops the blood pressure. So the smooth muscle around blood vessels have a very important role in maintaining blood pressure. And the veins are similar, but the difference between the artery and the veins is that the smooth muscle walls around the blood vessel in a vein is much thinner compared to the artery. Yeah. And here we have a capillary, which is the smallest type of blood vessel. And as you can see, the walls of a capillary is just one cell thick. Yeah. So one cell thin. Okay, so yeah, so this is an example of a capillary with that is just surrounded by just one cell. Yeah, so you can see this is the lumen, and the whole thing around that this lumen or this capillary is just one big cell, just one cell. So you can see this is the nucleus of the endothelial cell. Yeah. All right, now when we talk about blood tissue or connective tissue that is blood, there are many different types of cells that are part of the blood that make up the blood. Right? We can divide them into two major types: red blood cells and white blood cells. Yeah. But red blood cells is just one type of cell. But white blood cells is a different story. White blood cells, uh, there are many different types of white blood cells, as you can see here, and they all make up a complex system called the immune system, which protects our body from invaders such as bacteria, viruses, fungi, and other pathogens. And because it's a very complex system, there are many different types of cells that make up the immune system, or that make up what we call white blood cells. Yeah. So we're not going to discuss too much about this, because yeah, this is a whole different course in itself. I think in the in the fourth semester, you will get a course called immunology, and it's a very complex system which needs a whole course to discuss. Yeah, so we have red blood cells, we have white blood cells, and then we have platelets. They are not cells. Platelets are not cells, but they are part of an important part of our blood. And platelets are responsible for forming blood clots. So if you get a cut, you will bleed. Yeah, but once you get a cut, the platelets inside our blood will right away get to work to form a clot to stop or to stop that bleeding, right? Because if that doesn't happen, in rare cases where a person has a disease that causes the platelets to not work, that person has a condition called hemophilia, in which if they get a cut, if they start to bleed, they will not stop bleeding, and that is dangerous, right? If you lose too much blood, you can die. So platelets have a very important function inside the blood. Okay, let's look at other types of tissue. We have fat cells. So these are called adipocytes. Adipocytes are fat cells. They are used to store energy, and energy is stored in the form of fat, right? So when we eat something, when you eat food, when we digest our food, is basically broken down into the most simple nutrient, right? It can either be glucose, sugar, or it can be amino acids, yeah, which make a protein, right? Those are the two most basic ones, right? So any carbohydrates that you consume will eventually be broken down into glucose, which is sugar, and any proteins that you consume will be broken down into amino acids. Now, amino acids will then be used to make more proteins, right? For your muscles, for enzymes, for a lot of things inside the body. But sugar will then be used for energy, for you to metabolize, for you to be able to move, for your cells to be able to function. They all need energy, and energy is in the form of glucose. Now, if you eat too many uh, glucose, or if you eat too much and you consume too much glucose, and too much food, too much calories, basically, the excess energy must be stored. But that excess energy cannot be stored. Well, a lot of it is not stored in the form of glucose. It cannot be stored in the form of glucose. It must be converted into a different chemical for that to be able to be stored. So glucose is converted into glycogen, which is a type of, it's a different chemical from glucose, but it's similar. So it's converted into glycogen, and then that glycogen can be then stored inside our muscles. It can be stored in the liver. It can be stored in other tissues. But glucose can also be turned into fat or lipid droplets like this. Yeah. So that's why if we consume too much food, if you consume too much calories, we can gain weight by gaining a lot of fat, because that is how our body stores energy. The other way is uh, also applies. So if we don't eat enough, and our body needs energy, it will break down parts of our body to make glucose, so that glucose can then be used for our activities. Now, but you can't just not eat and hope that our fat will be gone. Yeah, because the first thing that the body breaks down is not fat. Fat is left as a last resort. Yeah, the first thing that our body breaks down, if we don't get enough to eat, and the body needs energy, the first thing that the body breaks down is muscle. It breaks down muscle, so that's why we become weaker if you don't if you don't eat. We become thinner and become weaker because our muscles are broken down for energy, not our fat. So that was an aside. Fat is stored in what's called fat cells or adipocytes like this. And then we have what's called nervous tissue. So nervous tissue is very important because it allows us impulses from the brain to reach throughout the body, right? It reaches throughout the body and controls many different aspects of our body. Right? This is the main type of cell that we can find in a nervous tissue, which is a neuron or nerve cell. So you can see this is the main body. Here we have the nucleus, we have the nucleolus, we have the other organelles here. And around the main body, we have what's called dendrites. And these dendrites, they are connected to other neurons. And then a neuron cell or a nerve cell like this has a very long tail, which is called the axon. And then along the axon, there are also strands that also connect to other dendrites of other cells, but they can also connect to other types of cells. For example, they can connect to a muscle cell. So if there is a brain impulse or there is a nerve impulse, that nerve impulse will travel down this axon and all the way to the end tail of this neuron, and that impulse will then be delivered to whatever cell is on the other side. It can be another neuron cell, but it can also be a muscle cell, for example. So if we try to move our hands, for example, a nerve cell will activate in our brain, and it will send impulses throughout the different nerves all the way until it meets a muscle, and it will activate that muscle so that muscle will contract so that we can move our hand. Yeah. So that's basically what a nerve cell looks like. But in the nervous tissue, there are not only nerve cells, but there are also other supporting cells, neuroglia. There are other cells other than nerve cells that are found in nervous tissue, and they support the function of the nerve cells. They maintain the physical structure of the tissue. They repair the tissue that are damaged or cells that are damaged. They perform phagocytosis. This is for defending against harmful bacteria. They provide nutrients and so on. So there are many other cells that help the nervous tissue or the nervous cell, sorry, to perform their function. But they are all in the tissue called nervous tissue. Yeah. Okay, so this is a quick look at the differences between a plant cell and animal cells. I'm sure you've done this before, so I'll just skip this. Right, so we looked at different types of cells, different types of tissue that are available inside the human body. That was obviously not a thorough look at all the different types of cells or all the different types of tissues, but just a quick overview of the different types of cells and tissues that are available so that you can know when to start, where to start if you want to learn a bit more about this topic, right? Now, in pharmacology or in pharmacy, especially in pharmacology, the knowledge of the cell, so knowing about these different types of cells, why cells have different structure, why they have different functions, and so on, is very important because it helps us do these three things. First, by knowing what the cell looks like, how it functions, and the structure of the cell, and so on, we can use that knowledge to determine the efficacy of drugs. So we can then perform experiments to work out, is a particular drug effective or not, or how effective is a particular drug. Now, other than efficacy, another important aspect of a drug is the safety, right? We don't want a drug that does its job, but also kills us. That's obviously not a good thing. So efficacy and safety are two very important aspects of a drug. The third thing is that by knowing how cells work, we can also determine the mechanism of action. So sometimes we know that a drug works, right? It does a particular job. For example, it eliminates fever, for example. But sometimes we don't know how that drug does that. And by knowing how it does the work, by knowing how it does that effect, or what mechanism of action that causes that drug to have that effect, by knowing that, we can then design new drugs that are better. We can also modify the drug so that it has less side effects and things like that. We can improve the safety and efficacy of drugs by knowing their mechanism of action. So determining the mechanism of action is also important because it is possible if we understand how the cell works. So this is an example. This is just a quick example. You don't really need to understand this. This is determining the efficacy of a cancer drug. So here we have cancer cells. We grow these cancer cells in a particular environment, and then we mix these drugs with the cancer cells, and then we measure how many cancer cells are left alive. So we can measure something like this. So if we increase the concentration of the drug, we can see that the percentage viability, or how many cancer cells that are left alive, goes down, right? So by increasing the concentration of the drug, we can see that it is able to kill those cancer cells. So this is just one example of an experiment to determine the efficacy of a drug. Then we can also determine the safety of a drug. So we can use our knowledge of how cells work to perform or to create experiments where we can understand how particular drugs affect our cells and how they can cause side effects and also toxic effects on our body. And then this is the third example. We can use our knowledge of cells. So for example, this is a parietal cell, which is found in the stomach. We can, by understanding the cell, we can know that antihistamine drugs, we can bind to certain molecules like this, or certain receptors here that blocks the production of CAMP, which also blocks the action of this transporter and so on, right? So all of this, you don't really need to understand this in detail, because you'll be learning this in the pharmacology course, which is, I think, in the second or third semester. Yeah. But by understanding how cells work, we can then work out how our drugs actually do work, right? So this is an example of an antihistamine drug, which is a drug to reduce the amount of acid in the stomach. Okay. Now let's quickly look at diseases that are caused due to cell damage. So the first one is diabetes, diabetes mellitus. Diabetes, we know that there are two types of diabetes. The first type of diabetes is that in people with type 1 diabetes, these people, they cannot produce insulin. So insulin is a hormone that signals our body to convert glucose into glycogen, like I explained previously. If you have too much glucose in our body, we will our body then responds by secreting insulin, and that insulin signals to the tissues or the cells around the body to take glucose and turn it into glycogen. This is important because if we have too much glucose in our body and it stays high, the level of glucose stays high for a long period of time in our body, it can damage all sorts of things. It can damage our brain, it can damage all of our other organs. So it's dangerous if we have a high level of glucose in our blood for a long period of time. That's why insulin is very important, because it tells other cells in our body to take glucose and then turn it into glycogen, so that the level of glucose in our blood decreases. Now, people with type 1 diabetes, they cannot produce glucose because the cells that produce glucose in the pancreas are damaged. So this is an example where a damaged cell can cause a whole disease. So insulin is produced by the pancreas, and in the pancreas it is produced by a very particular type of cell called the beta pancreas cell, the beta cells. And then only these beta cells are able to produce and secrete insulin. So when these beta cells are destroyed or damaged due to radiation, due to drugs, due to toxins, due to autoimmune diseases, for example, then that person will not be able to produce insulin. Now, the cure for that, or there is no cure, right? We can't, if your beta pancreas cells are damaged, then that's it. There's no way to fix that. But we can control it, and we can control it by just giving you insulin. So if a person has type 1 diabetes, that disease is controlled by injecting insulin into your body. So that person will have to take insulin manually for the rest of their lives. Now, for type 2 diabetes, this is more dangerous because it doesn't work, or insulin doesn't work. So for type 2 diabetes, by injecting insulin, it will not help much, because in type 2 diabetes, your pancreas is still producing insulin. Your pancreas is healthy. The beta cells in your pancreas can still produce insulin. But the problem is that all our other cells in our body does not react to insulin. Remember, insulin is a hormone. It tells other cells to take glucose and turn it into glycogen. But if these other cells don't respond to insulin, it doesn't matter how much insulin you produce, it doesn't matter how much insulin you give yourself, the other cells in your body will just ignore it. They do not react to insulin. So to treat this, again, there is no actual cure, but we can control it. To control this type 2 diabetes, patients, they consume other drugs that lower the amount of glucose in other ways. So different mechanisms. So this is one example of a disease that occurs because of a damage to a type of cell. Right? Let's skip this. We're not going into too much detail. So another example is acute renal failure. Again, we're not going to go into too much detail of this, but basically acute renal failure is when the cells in our kidneys are damaged. So our kidneys has a main function, which is to filter the blood and make sure that substances that we don't need, uh, wasteful substances, waste products of our metabolism and other compounds, including drugs, are filtered, and then they are thrown out through the urine, right? And in order to do that, our kidney needs to be able to filter the blood effectively. If we have damage to the cells in our kidneys, then that filtration will not happen efficiently. And if the damage to the cells, the kidney cells, are too heavy, or they take too much damage, then our kidneys may not work at all, and that is when it's called kidney failure. And that can be very devastating, because because if our kidneys don't work, then all of these waste materials, these toxic substances that our body produces through the metabolic processes, will keep piling up inside our body. Yeah. Okay, let's skip the pathology. And then we have autoimmune diseases. Autoimmune diseases are is a disease where our immune system our immune system is designed to seek out foreign substances, right? Foreign cells, bacteria, viruses, and other cells that are not part of our body, and attack them and destroy them, right? But in some individuals, their immune systems, they cannot recognize which is a cell that is part of our body and which is a cell that is foreign. Yeah? So they cannot differentiate between foreign and their own body cells. So what they do is they attack their own cells, and this is partly an example. This is partly a cause for diabetes. So remember, in diabetes type 1, the beta cells of the pancreas are destroyed and cannot produce insulin. And many research shows that that is partly because of autoimmune disease. Yeah. And then we also have cancer. It's not here, but cancer can affect all types of cells, right? And cancer is a disease where if you remember our lecture on cell cycle, the cell cycle controls when the cell can differentiate, right? It controls when the cell can enter mitosis and divide. Yeah. And in cancer cells, those cells have lost that control, so they cannot stop themselves from dividing. So cancer is a disease where the cells proliferate and divide very quickly and without limit. Right. Now let's do, okay, this is just a very quick example. You don't really need to go into too much detail about this. You don't need to know too much of this, because again, this is not our focus for this, but you will study this even in more detail in other courses. Right? But there are examples of drugs. So we have antibiotics. Antibiotics work on antibiotics are drugs that work on cells, especially bacterial cells, obviously. They damage the DNA, they damage the cell membrane, they damage the cell walls of bacteria, and so on. Then we have antiviral agents. So this is how viruses work. Yeah? They penetrate our body cells. They integrate themselves with our genetic material, and then they synthesize. So our body is hijacked to produce more viral proteins. Yeah? And here we have different drugs that can attack or that can prevent viral infection from different stages of that infection. Right? And again, anti-cancer cells. So remember, cancer is a disease where cells cannot stop themselves from dividing. Yeah? So they have no control. Those cells can divide and proliferate very quickly and without limit. Yeah? So if you remember from our cell cycle class, we discussed about the cell cycle control system, right? The system that controls when a cell can undergo synthesis, when a cell can move from G1 to S, when a cell can move to G2 from G2 to M, and so on. Right now, that system is damaged in a cancer cell, but then we have cancer drugs or anti-cancer drugs that tries to kill those cells but cancer cells obviously uh, by interfering with the cell cycle at different places. So we have anti-metabolites. They interfere with the DNA replication of cancer cells. We have bleomycin, which is a kind of antibiotic, but it can be used to kill cancer cells in the G2 phase. And then we have vinca alkaloids like vincristine, vinblastine, vincristine, and so on, which destroys or kills cancer cells by interfering with the M phase. Okay. Yeah. Okay. We won't go into too much about immunomodulators. Okay. So that was all about the different types of cells that are available, and a quick overview of the different types of cells and tissues that are available in our body, and also a quick look at some diseases that can be caused by malfunction in cells. Right? Any questions? Okay. If
sir.
Yeah, Alia.
Can you please upload this recording on EduNext so we can review it?
Yeah. Okay. I will upload the recording.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Also, sir, can you please share the PowerPoint as well?
Yes, of course. I will upload the PowerPoint.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Okay. So for the a quick reminder again, please don't forget to contact your supervisor for the assignment. So you have to prepare a video presentation, which has to be uploaded by next week, if I'm not mistaken. So please don't forget to contact your supervisors and discuss with them the topics. And I think that's it for the reminder. Okay, I will upload this video and also the slide in EduNext. If there are no more questions, I will end the session here. For the attendance, I will mark it manually. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and good luck with your assignment.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, welcome.
Thank you, sir.